The sound that broke the room wasn't a scream. It was bone. Dr. Colin Mercer hit the floor clutching his arm, staring up at the pregnant wife he'd just called fragile. Maeve's breath was steady, her hands trembling not from fear, but control. "You said I was delicate," she whispered, her belly rising beneath the torn cotton of her dress. "Delicate doesn't mean defenseless." Sierra's perfume still hung in the air as she backed toward the wall, realizing too late she'd walked into a storm disguised as a woman. "Before we begin, please like, subscribe and tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from? United States, Canada, Malaysia, UK, Australia, Jamaica." The morning light poured through the tall windows of Maeve Larkin's kitchen, touching the polished wood floor and the ceramic bowls she'd collected from every flea market in western North Carolina. Outside, mist clung to the Blue Ridge like it didn't want to let go. Inside, Maeve breathed with the quiet rhythm of someone who had spent her whole life trying to earn peace. She taught prenatal yoga 3 mornings a week at a small studio in downtown Asheville. The women came from everywhere: teachers, nurses, baristas, and they adored her. "You have the calmest voice," they'd say as she adjusted their posture. Maeve would smile and joke that it came from a childhood spent learning patience. She never mentioned that patience had been taught through bruises, repetition, and hours on a dojo floor. She hadn't touched a sparring mat in 10 years. That was part of the deal she'd made with herself when she married Dr. Colin Mercer, the orthopedic surgeon with perfect hair, a perfect handshake, and a smile that made people trust him too easily. He was from Raleigh, polished, ambitious. She was mountain calm, slow to speak, quick to listen. When they met at a charity fun run, Colin said she moved like someone who doesn't know how to hurry. He meant it as a compliment. Back then, she thought he was the kind of man who valued steadiness. She was wrong, but that's getting ahead of the story. For now, their life looked perfect from the outside. They had a cedar-sided home with a porch swing and a baby on the way. At 36, Maeve was 6 months pregnant and radiant in a way that made strangers smile at grocery stores. Colin posted photos of her belly on his professional Instagram with captions like, "My greatest creation yet." The comments called them couple goals. But offline, the air in the Mercer household had grown thin. Colin had been coming home later. He blamed surgeries, emergency calls, research dinners. Maeve wanted to believe him, so she did. Until she found the first piece of evidence, a wine-stained receipt from a bistro she'd never been to, 2 entrees, 1 dessert, and a handwritten note at the bottom. "You make me forget everything else, S." She told herself S stood for surgical consultant. Denial is its own kind of yoga pose. Painful, but flexible. One Sunday morning, Colin left early, saying he was meeting a real estate consultant about investment property near Lake Lure. When he came back, he smelled of lavender shampoo. She didn't use lavender anything. That night, Maeve sat in the nursery they'd painted sage green and placed her hand on her stomach. The baby kicked, soft but certain. "We're okay," she whispered. "We're okay." But her reflection in the window didn't look convinced. Now, pause for a second. This is where things start to shift. Because peace, when forced, becomes pressure, and pressure always looks for a crack. The crack came on a Wednesday. Colin burst through the door with a grin too big to be genuine. "Guess what?" he said, tossing his keys onto the counter. "I found someone who can help us sell the old cabin faster. She's brilliant, local, total go-getter." "What's her name?" Maeve asked. He hesitated for half a second, just long enough. "Sierra Holt." The name hung there, unfamiliar but sharp. "Nice," Maeve managed. "When do we meet her?" "Soon," he said, already scrolling his phone. "She's got great instincts about staging homes. You'll love her." But Maeve didn't love how he said "you'll love her." She didn't love that he looked at his phone like it was oxygen. That night, she dreamed of her old dojo. She saw Master Takeda pacing in front of her, saying the same line he'd repeated years ago after her last tournament: "Still water hides the deepest current." She woke up sweating, unsure if it was the baby or the past warning her. By the end of that week, Sierra's name came up more than her own. Sierra thinks neutral tones sell better. Sierra says the market's heating up. Sierra's got connections. Maeve started to hate that name the way one hates a mosquito at midnight. Tiny, persistent, impossible to ignore. Friday afternoon, she was folding baby clothes when her phone buzzed. A notification popped up on the home iPad, synced to Colin's account. She shouldn't have looked, but she did. Sierra Holt, can't wait to be in your house again. Her hands froze on a pair of tiny socks. The house suddenly felt too quiet. In the distance, a train whistle echoed down the valley, long and lonely. Now, hold on, because what happens next will shift everything. Maeve didn't confront him. Not yet. That's not who she was anymore. Instead, she cleaned the kitchen, set the table, and pretended she hadn't read the message. Years of discipline taught her that real power often looks like patience. When Colin came home, she kissed his cheek and asked about his day. He told her about clients, about projections. She nodded, timing her breathing like she did during yoga poses. Steady inhale, slow exhale, each one a silent count to keep from shaking. That night, while he showered, Maeve sat cross-legged on the bed, the baby moving under her ribs like a small reminder, you're not alone. Her gaze drifted to the framed certificate tucked in the back of her closet. Maeve Larkin, National Kung Fu Champion, 2010. She hadn't looked at it in years. Still water, she murmured again, touching her stomach. We'll stay still a little longer. But little did she know, the storm she was trying to avoid was already walking toward her porch in high heels and confidence, carrying a bottle of red wine and calling herself the help. And by the time that doorbell rang, peace had already packed its bags. I poured my heart into this story because I believe real emotions still matter. My girlfriend laughed and said I'd never even reach 1,000 subscribers. She might be right. Unless someone like you proves her wrong. Please hit subscribe, not for me alone, but for the stories that deserve to be heard. The next few weeks rolled in like North Carolina fog. Soft, slow, and suffocating. Maeve started noticing things she used to miss. A second toothbrush in the bathroom drawer that wasn't hers, a faint perfume clinging to Colin's lab coat, the sudden way he locked his phone now before setting it down. Every small thing added up until silence itself began to hum. At first, she tried to reason with it. He's stressed, she told her friend Carla during prenatal yoga class. He's just tired. Carla tilted her head. You sure you're not tired of making excuses? Maeve laughed, but her voice cracked somewhere between inhale and exhale. That night, Colin came home late again. The digital clock blinked 12:47 a.m. He smelled like wine and smoke, neither of which belonged to him. Where were you? She asked quietly. Hospital fundraiser, he said, peeling off his jacket without looking at her. You know how those things go. Who was there? He glanced up, jaw tight. Don't start, Maeve. I'm exhausted. Now, pause for a second. This is where things get interesting, because the next thing he said would become the moment Maeve stopped being blind. You're acting paranoid, Colin muttered. Maybe it's the hormones. You're not yourself lately. Hormones. The word stung more than it should have. It was a tidy little box to stuff her feelings into. Irrational, hormonal, fragile. She said nothing. Just nodded and went upstairs. But while he slept, Maeve lay awake counting breaths, staring at the ceiling, realizing that silence wasn't protecting her anymore. It was suffocating her. The next day, she found Sierra Holt's business card on the kitchen counter. A gold logo, bold font. Expensive paper. Holt Realty Group. Luxury homes. Asheville and beyond. Maeve traced the embossed letters with her thumb. There was a handwritten note at the bottom. You have a beautiful home. We should celebrate soon. S. Now, hold on, because what happens next doesn't play out like you'd expect. Maeve didn't throw the card away. She slipped it into her apron pocket like evidence. Quiet people notice everything. And she was noticing. That afternoon, she visited Colin at the hospital with his favorite takeout. Thai food from the corner shop on Biltmore Avenue. She arrived unannounced. The nurses smiled politely. Dr. Mercer's in his office, one said. You can go on back. When Maeve opened the door, Colin wasn't alone. Sierra stood near his desk wearing a cream blazer and a smile too confident to be innocent. Her hand rested lightly on Colin's shoulder as they laughed over something on his computer screen. "Oh," Sierra said, stepping back. "You must be Maeve." Colin's face froze mid-laugh. "Maeve, this is Sierra. She's been helping with the property stuff." Maeve set the food down on the desk, her voice steady. "Looks like you're both working up an appetite." Neither of them spoke for a few seconds. Sierra's perfume, lavender and white tea, filled the air like a taunt. Colin cleared his throat. "We were just going over listings. Sierra, could you give us a minute?" "Of course." Sierra smiled sweetly at Maeve. "It was so nice to finally meet you. I've heard so much." When the door closed, Maeve didn't speak right away. She looked at her husband, really looked at him. "How long?" His eyes flickered. "You're being ridiculous." "Don't," she said softly. "Don't gaslight me." Colin sighed and rubbed his temples. "You always jump to conclusions. You can't handle stress. It's why I don't tell you things. You get worked up." She stood there, belly round beneath her sweatshirt, heart pounding. "I'm carrying your child, Colin. The least you could do is stop treating me like a liability." He stared at her, and for a moment, there was something cruel in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before. "Maybe if you weren't so delicate all the time, we could actually talk." Delicate. The word again. Maeve didn't respond. She just left. Because sometimes silence says, "I see exactly who you are now." 2 weeks passed. Colin became even more distant. His mother, Linda, started dropping by unannounced, always armed with criticism disguised as concern. "You really should dress up a bit more," Linda said one afternoon, scanning Maeve's yoga pants and messy bun. "Pregnancy isn't an excuse to stop trying." Maeve smiled thinly. "I'm focused on staying healthy." "Healthy?" Linda chuckled. "Honey, love doesn't survive on kale and breathing exercises. My son needs a woman who can keep up with him." Maeve wanted to say, "Your son can barely keep up with his lies." But she didn't. She just poured Linda more coffee and reminded herself, still water. That night, Colin came home earlier than usual, carrying groceries like a peace offering. "I thought I'd make dinner," he said too cheerfully. Sierra might swing by later to discuss the cabin staging. Maeve froze. "Here." "Yeah, I figured it'd be easier to show her the layout." "Now, remember when I said the cracks were starting to spread? Well, this is where the foundation begins to crumble." "Colin," she said carefully, "I don't think that's appropriate." He looked at her like she was a child. "Appropriate? Maeve, it's business." "Business doesn't text you after midnight," she whispered. His expression hardened. "You went through my messages? You left them on the iPad." He threw the grocery bag onto the counter, oranges rolling across the floor. "Unbelievable. You can't trust anyone, can you? You need help, Maeve. Real help." Her throat tightened. "You mean therapy?" "I mean perspective," he snapped. "Not everything's about you." The irony stung. Every insult felt rehearsed, as if he'd been practicing with Sierra. Later that night, Maeve sat alone on the porch while rain whispered against the roof. The air smelled of pine and stormwater. Somewhere down the road, a neighbor's wind chime rang, fragile and persistent. She remembered something Master Takeda once said, "You cannot control the storm, only how you stand in it." Her baby kicked again, a small pulse of life against her ribs. "We're standing," she murmured. "We're not falling." The next evening, Colin came home in a tailored shirt she hadn't seen before. He hummed as he set the table, too casual, too rehearsed. "Big night?" she asked. He smiled. "Sierra's coming for dinner. I told her you'd love to meet her properly this time." The way he said properly made something inside her twist. "Tonight." "Why not?" he said. "We're adults. You'll see I'm not hiding anything." But here's the part nobody talks about. When a manipulator wants control, they don't just lie, they make you doubt your own eyes. Maeve nodded slowly. "Sure," she said. "I'll set another plate." He smiled, satisfied. "Good. I knew you'd come around. As he walked upstairs to shower, Maeve stood at the sink, hands resting on the counter, staring out at the rain streaking down the window. She wasn't angry yet. She was calculating. Because patience isn't passivity, it's preparation. And while Colin thought she was breaking, Maeve was remembering. Remembering every form, every breath, every lesson about balance, timing, and restraint. The house was quiet except for the rhythmic tap of water from the leaking faucet. She turned it off. The sound stopped, but the silence felt louder than ever. Tomorrow night, she thought, we'll see who's really fragile. By the time the sun set over the Blue Ridge, Maeve had rearranged the dining table 3 times. Not because it needed it, because she needed it. The movements kept her calm. Fold napkin. Adjust candle. Inhale, exhale. Outside, the cicadas sang the soundtrack of southern evenings, loud and endless. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of rosemary chicken and dread. Colin was upstairs getting ready, whistling like a man without secrets. Maeve stared at the doorway, every muscle aware, every sense sharpened. Now, pause for a second, because this isn't the start of a dinner. It's the start of a reckoning. The doorbell rang at 7 sharp. Sierra Holt stood on the porch holding a bottle of Cabernet and a smile polished enough to blind. Her hair fell in perfect waves over her cream blazer, the same one from Colin's office. "Maeve," she said brightly, like they were old friends. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by." Colin insisted. "Of course," Maeve replied, voice smooth. "Come in." The house smelled of baked rosemary, lemon, and betrayal. Colin appeared, adjusting his cufflinks. "There's my 2 favorite women," he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Maeve caught the word too. She filed it away. Remember when we said quiet people notice everything? She was noticing. Dinner started politely enough. Colin poured wine for Sierra, water for Maeve. He carved the chicken like a man performing for an audience. "So, Sierra," Maeve said, forcing a smile, "how long have you and my husband been working together?" "Oh, a few months," Sierra answered casually. "He's been such a mentor. I don't know what I'd do without him." Colin laughed. "She's a quick learner. You'd like her energy, Maeve. She's so driven." Maeve's fork paused mid-air. "Driven," she echoed. "That's nice. I used to be that way too." Sierra's gaze flicked to Maeve's stomach. "Well, you've got other priorities now. You should be resting. Resting. Fragile. Delicate. Always the same words, the same cage." Maeve smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised what I can handle." Now, here's where things get interesting, because while they thought they were toying with her, Maeve was taking mental snapshots. Every smirk, every touch, every tiny cruelty for later. Colin leaned back in his chair. "Maeve's always been too cautious. I tell her to relax, but she worries about everything." Sierra giggled. "She seems so gentle. It must be exhausting keeping her safe." Maeve felt something stir behind her ribs, something that wasn't just the baby. Still water hides the deepest current. She looked down at her plate. "You know, safety's funny," she said softly. "It disappears when you think you've earned it." Neither of them knew what to do with that, so they just laughed awkwardly and changed the subject. After dinner, Colin offered Sierra a tour of the house. "You'll love the nursery," he said, resting a hand at the small of her back. Maeve watched from the doorway as they walked down the hall together, their laughter echoing like ghosts. She wanted to scream, but instead, she breathed. In, out. 1, 2. Controlled. When they returned, Sierra looked entirely too comfortable. Her shoes off, glass of wine refilled. "Maeve," she said sweetly, "you don't mind if I use your restroom?" "Down the hall, first door on the left," Maeve replied. As Sierra disappeared, Maeve turned to Colin. "You're really doing this?" He shrugged, pouring himself another glass. "Doing what?" "Bringing her here. Into our home. While I'm carrying your child." "Don't be dramatic," he said. "It's business." "Then why does business wear your shirts and call you after midnight?" Colin slammed the glass onto the counter, red spilling across the marble like blood. Because she listens. Because she makes me feel alive. You, he gestured at her belly. You just make demands. Maeve's throat tightened. Demands. Like fidelity. Respect. He laughed. You're so fragile, Maeve. So emotional. You twist everything. Fragile. There it was again. The word that followed her like a curse. She stepped closer. Say it again. What? Fragile. He smirked. You're fragile. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. Even the cicadas outside seemed to pause. Thank you, she said calmly. I needed to hear that. Sierra returned from the bathroom just in time to feel the temperature drop. Colin turned toward her. Everything okay? Maeve's voice came low, steady. Actually, no. I think it's time you both left my home. Your home? Colin scoffed. You mean our home, the one I pay for? Funny, Maeve said. You pay for the mortgage, but I pay for the peace. And right now, you're overdrawing. Enough, he snapped, stepping forward. You're embarrassing yourself. Am I? She said, tilting her head. Sierra crossed her arms. You're really overreacting. Colin said you had anxiety, but this... Maeve's eyes flashed. He told you that? Sierra hesitated. He was just worried about you. Maeve took a step forward. Let me guess, he said I was too gentle, too quiet, too fragile. Silence. Colin sneered. If the shoe fits. That's when Maeve laughed. Not bitterly. Softly. Like she just remembered the punchline of an old joke. You know what's funny, Colin, she said. The last man who called me fragile spent 6 weeks drinking through a straw. For the first time, Sierra looked unsure. Colin frowned. What are you talking about? Maeve didn't answer. She just straightened her spine and breathed the way Master Takeda had taught her. Centered, grounded, dangerous in stillness. Then, in a tone almost kind, she said, Dinner's over. Now, remember this moment, because it's the quiet before the explosion. The next act will begin not with a word, but with a shove that changes everything. But before you go thinking this is just a story about revenge, think again. It's about every person who's ever been underestimated, silenced, or told to stay small for the comfort of others. If you've ever had to smile through disrespect, if you've ever swallowed your strength just to keep the peace, then you already know what Maeve's feeling right now. And maybe that's why this story matters. Because when the calmest person in the room finally decides enough is enough, the world shifts. So if Maeve's courage reminds you of someone, your mother, your sister, maybe even yourself, take 2 seconds. Hit subscribe button. Not for algorithms, not for numbers, but because stories like this remind people they're not alone. And who knows? By the time you see how Maeve's story ends, you might remember a strength you thought you'd lost too. The house was too quiet after Sierra left the table. The candles still burned down to crooked wax, their flames trembling in the draft that slipped through the screen door. Outside, thunder rolled across the blue ridge like a warning that no one heard. Colin leaned against the counter, sipping the last of his wine. You could have at least pretended to be polite, he said, voice heavy with contempt. Maeve didn't answer. She was gathering plates, moving like a ghost through her own kitchen. God, you're impossible, he muttered. Do you know how exhausting it is living with someone who's always on edge? You can't handle life. You can't handle me. She stacked the dishes carefully. Then maybe you should find someone easier to handle. He laughed, sharp and bitter. Already did. Now, hold on, because that's the sentence that flips the switch. Everything after it happens because of that line. Maeve turned slowly. Her eyes weren't angry. They were clear. You just said that out loud. So what? He shrugged. Truth hurts. It does, she said softly. Especially when it's spoken by a coward. He slammed his glass into the sink, shards scattering across the counter. Don't you dare talk to me like that. You think you scare me. Scare you, she echoed. No. But I think you finally see me. He stepped closer, wine on his breath. What I see is a hormonal mess who doesn't know when to quit. She didn't move. And what I see, she whispered, is a man trying to convince himself he still has control. That hit deeper than she expected. His jaw tightened. Control. You want control. Fine. He grabbed her arm. Not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to remind her he could. And that's when something ancient stirred, the muscle memory of every kata, every drill, every strike she'd buried beneath domestic peace. Let go of me, Colin. Or what? He sneered. You'll cry. Once, she said quietly. I would've. She shifted her weight. He didn't notice. People never notice small shifts, until it's too late. Her right hand turned, thumb pressing against the nerve just below his wrist. A twist. Quick. Controlled. He gasped, dropping her arm. What the hell? Still water, she murmured. Runs deepest. He lunged forward in drunken anger. She sidestepped, redirected his momentum with the grace of someone who'd trained half her life for balance, not violence. He stumbled into the counter, knocking over a candle. Flame kissed the tablecloth before snuffing out in spilled wine. Stop! Sierra's voice shrieked from the hallway. She'd come back to check on him, guilt or curiosity drawing her into the storm. Get out, Sierra, Maeve said without looking at her. But Sierra didn't move. Colin, are you okay? He straightened, clutching his wrist. She's insane. Maeve exhaled slowly, centering her breath. You pushed a pregnant woman. You called her fragile. Let's see who breaks first. He laughed, but it came out shaky. You wouldn't dare. You sure? He stepped closer again, reckless. Try me. He shoved her shoulder. Not hard, but direct. A test. And that's all it took. Now, pause for a second. This isn't a fight scene. It's a moment of remembering. The body always remembers what the heart tries to forget. Maeve's stance shifted, feet shoulder-width apart, knees soft, center grounded. Her eyes locked on his chest, not his face. No anger. Just clarity. Colin swung. Wild. She moved aside, caught his forearm, pivoted, and used his force against him. In one breath, his body hit the floor. His elbow bent backward at an angle that made him scream. Sierra gasped, frozen between fear and disbelief. Maeve, stop! Colin groaned. You should have stopped first, she said, voice trembling. Not with rage, but release. He tried to push up with his free arm. She stepped back, giving him space. Don't get up, she warned. He ignored her. She caught his wrist again, held it still. I said don't. He froze, eyes wide now. For the first time, the surgeon understood what bones could do when met with precision instead of mercy. Listen to me, Maeve said, kneeling beside him. You can call me names, you can betray me, but you don't ever lay hands on me again. Sierra finally found her voice. Maeve, please. He didn't mean it. Maeve looked at her, eyes calm. He meant every word. So did you. Sierra shook her head, tears streaking her mascara. I didn't know. You knew, Maeve interrupted. You just didn't care until it got ugly. She released Colin's arm. He curled into himself, breathing heavy. Call an ambulance, Maeve said. Sierra blinked. What? Call 911. Tell them your friend slipped. You were both drunk. That's the story, understand? Why would I? Maeve stood, one hand resting on her belly. Because if you don't, I'll show the officers every message, every photo, every hotel charge. You'll lose more than your heels tonight. Sierra stared at her phone, trembling. Fine. She dialed. Maeve turned back to Colin. You'll sign the divorce papers. You'll transfer the house. And you'll stay away from me and this child. He coughed out a laugh. You think you can blackmail me? I think I don't need to, she said. You've already ruined yourself. The wail of sirens grew in the distance. Closer, louder, inevitable. When the paramedics arrived, Maeve stood calmly by the front door. Her story was simple. Her husband slipped during an argument. She panicked and called for help. She spoke clearly, breathing evenly, hand resting protectively on her stomach. The officers glanced at Colin, pale and sweating on the floor, and at Sierra, shaking beside him. The pieces fit themselves. Within minutes, they were gone, lights fading down the wet street. Maeve closed the door. The house fell silent again, except for the rhythmic tick of the kitchen clock. She exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. Her whole body trembled, not from fear, but release. She wasn't proud. She wasn't even angry anymore. She was done. Now, remember when she told Master Takeda she'd never fight again? Turns out, she kept that promise. Because this wasn't a fight, it was self-defense. It was survival. She cleaned the kitchen slowly, methodically, picked up the broken glass, wiped the counter, opened the windows to let the storm air in. Outside, rain poured over the mountains, washing everything clean. She whispered to the child inside her, "It's over. We're safe." And for the first time since she met Colin Mercer, she meant it. Morning came gray and heavy over Asheville. The storm had rinsed the mountains clean, leaving puddles that mirrored the pale sky. Inside the Mercer house, everything felt different. Not louder, not calmer, just honest. Maeve moved through the kitchen in a slow rhythm, barefoot, careful. The counters were wiped, the floor scrubbed, every trace of last night reduced to memory. Only the faint smell of wine and candle wax lingered, ghosts of what used to be. Her phone buzzed. A voicemail from the hospital. Dr. Mercer's surgery went well. Arm stabilized. Jaw wired. She deleted it without listening twice. Now, pause for a second. Because this is the part nobody tells you about starting over. It doesn't begin with fireworks or freedom songs. It begins with paperwork. Police reports. Silence. A cup of coffee you finally get to drink while it's still hot. 2 weeks later, a deputy dropped off an envelope. Inside, Colin's formal apology, drafted by his lawyer. My client accepts responsibility for his behavior and agrees to cooperate fully with the divorce proceedings. Translation. He knows she won. Maeve didn't smile. Victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like release. She'd already contacted a family law attorney in downtown Asheville, Vanessa Prine, a woman with sharp suits and a sharper sense of justice. "Don't worry," Vanessa said after reading through Maeve's notes and screenshots. "You've built your case better than most private investigators. He'll settle fast." "Good," Maeve replied. "I'm tired of fighting." Vanessa looked up. "Then don't fight. Just finish." 3 months passed. Maeve gave birth in late October, when the leaves were burnished gold and the air smelled of wood smoke. She named her daughter Aria Larkin Mercer, keeping the Mercer only because her lawyer said it helped with custody filings. Aria arrived healthy, fierce, loud. The nurses laughed when Maeve whispered, "You're the quiet storm I was waiting for." Colin sent flowers to the hospital. She sent them back. Now, remember that phrase, "Still water runs deepest"? It came back here in the delivery room, when pain met purpose and Maeve breathed through both like they were the same thing. She realized she hadn't lost her strength. She'd just been saving it for someone who deserved it. By December, the divorce was final. She got the house, full custody, and child support. Colin got silence. The community buzzed for a while, whispers in coffee shops, speculation at the yoga studio. People always think they know what goes on behind closed doors. But Maeve didn't explain, didn't correct. She'd learned that truth doesn't need witnesses. She sold Colin's BMW, paid off the mortgage, and reopened the side studio on their property, the one he used as an office. Only now it had a new sign. The Still Water Collective, Women's Self-Defense and Healing Center. On opening day, 8 women showed up. Some bruised, some shy, all hungry for the same thing, to stop feeling small. Maeve began each class the same way. "We don't train to hurt people," she told them. "We train so no one can convince us we're powerless again." And every time she said it, she felt that weight inside her loosen just a little more. One evening, as winter crept down from the mountains, Linda Mercer showed up on the porch unannounced. The older woman looked thinner, smaller somehow. "I just came to see my granddaughter," she said. Maeve stepped outside, closing the door behind her. "You can send her a letter when she's older." Linda sighed. "Maeve, please. My son's lost everything." "So did I," Maeve said quietly. "Difference is, I rebuilt it." Linda's mouth trembled. "He says he still loves you." Maeve nodded once. "Then maybe loving me should have meant respecting me." She turned back toward the door, voice steady. "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Mercer." For the first time, Linda didn't correct her for dropping Mom. Spring arrived early that year. Arya learned to crawl. The studio filled with new faces. One woman, a nurse named Belinda, confessed after class. "My husband says I'm too emotional. Watching you move, it's like watching permission." Maeve smiled. "Emotion's not weakness. It's information." Belinda blinked back tears. "You think I can learn to be that strong?" Maeve reached out, steady hand on her shoulder. "You already are. You just forgot. Now, hold on, because that line right there, it's the heart of the whole story." Every person listening, every viewer watching from some living room or phone screen, knows what forgetting feels like. We all do. Late one night, after putting Arya to bed, Maeve sat on the porch swing with a cup of tea. The sky stretched wide and violet over the mountains. Crickets hummed. The baby monitor crackled softly beside her. She opened an old wooden box she hadn't touched in years. Inside lay her black belt, folded neatly beside a faded photo of her and Master Takeda after her final tournament. On the back, in his handwriting, "Peace is not forgetting how to fight, it's choosing when not to." She smiled, eyes wet. "I remember now," she whispered. The porch light flickered. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn carried through the night. Low, steady, like a promise. Maeve breathed in the cool mountain air and let it fill every corner of her lungs. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel fragile. She felt free. A few months later, a local paper ran a feature. "From Broken to Balanced, Asheville Mom Empowers Women Through Kung Fu." The reporter asked, "What made you start this?" Maeve looked into the camera. "Because I forgot who I was once. And I never want another woman to do the same." When the article went online, her inbox filled with messages from strangers, teachers, nurses, single moms, saying her story gave them courage. She read every one. Some nights she cried, not from pain, but from gratitude. And that brings us here, to you. Because maybe you've been where Maeve was, quietly carrying too much, pretending peace while fighting to remember your own strength. Maybe you know someone living that story right now. If you do, share this with them. Not for clicks, not for clout, but because sometimes one story is all it takes to make someone believe in their own comeback. Hit like and subscribe to this YouTube channel, not for me, but for every person who needs to be reminded that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "I'm still here." And if tonight you find yourself staring at the ceiling, wondering if you can start over, remember Maeve. Remember that still water isn't weak. It's patient. And when it finally moves, it shapes mountains.